Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're diving into a pretty potent devotional series. It's by Greg Elkan, titled The Believer and Fragility.
Right, and Elkan lays out this very specific argument, quite provocative, really.
He does. It's all about how certain modern cultural trends focused on, let's say, self-protection clash head-on with what he sees as the core demands of Christian life.
Exactly. So our mission today is to unpack Elkan's idea of fragility. He really sees it as a defining thing for our time.
And
then we'll get into his argument for why he believes this whole mindset just doesn't square with a biblical worldview. He actually uses scripture, of the stuff you hear at weddings sometimes, but applies it pretty sharply to current issues.
it's interesting. And Elkan starts by saying, look, every generation deals with cultures that don't fit with faith. It's not new.
Right.
But he argues this current culture, the fragility one, is different. Why? Because its values can look noble on the surface.
Things like self-care, emotional safety, demanding respect.
Exactly. They sound good. But Greg argues they're built on unbiblical principles. So we need to figure out what those principles are, according to him.
Precisely. So let's start with how Elkan actually defines fragility. He's talking specifically about the mind here.
Okay.
He sees it as a person's basic inability to manage confrontation or cope with criticism, judgment. It's about resilience or the lack of it.
And where does he think this comes from? He traces back, right?
He does. He points to parenting and education over, say, the last couple of decades. He claims Gen Z and Gen Alpha, the current younger generations, were raised in what he bluntly calls a safe space experiment.
An experiment.
Yeah. Places where things like judgment, maybe bullying, even firm discipline were sort of forbidden or removed. He says the aim was to minimize harm, but, well, he states, the results of this experiment are now in.
And he doesn't think they're good results.
Not from his perspective. He argues the outcome is a generation conditioned to see the world mainly through their own rights, their sense of safety, their immediate feelings.
And this leads to some pretty strong labels he uses.
Oh, yeah. Very strong, very provocative labels. They really capture his argument about maybe a lack of preparedness for life's bumps.
Walk us through those. What are they?
Okay, three main ones. First, he calls them the trauma generation.
The trauma generation. That sounds intense.
It is. And it's pointed because he notes they largely haven't experienced something like war, yet many report, significant trauma from situations he considers lower stakes.
So he's saying there's a disconnect.
That's his argument, that the emotional response is maybe disproportionate to the event itself, leading to this idea of trauma that doesn't quite line up with historical hardship.
Okay, what's the second label?
The trigger generation, meaning people deeply distressed or maybe incapacitated by certain words, scenes, ideas.
Things that set them off emotionally.
Exactly. And the third is the offense generation.
The offense generation.
Yeah. Elkan claims this group somehow missed the memo, as he puts it, that being offended is part and parcel of the human experience.
So they see being offended not as something internal, but as an attack.
Right, an attack requiring a response, maybe even retribution, not just a feeling you manage.
Wow, those are definitely strong claims. You can see how that sets up his main argument about incompatibility, though.
Absolutely. If fragility means you must prioritize your own safety and emotional comfort.
Then how does that fit with what Elkan sees in the Bible?
It doesn't, according to him. The tension is immediate. He stresses that the New Testament calls believers to things like lay down their lives, pick up crosses daily, turn the other cheek when attacked.
Bless when reviled, endure persecution.
Right. And somehow rejoice always, regardless of how you feel. The focus is self-sacrifice, not self-preservation in the way he sees fragility demanding it.
That contrast really is the core of his whole devotional series. And it's interesting how he thinks this call to endure hardship is perceived today.
Yeah, he observes that young people who haven't, as he puts it, had their hearts transformed by the gospel, or maybe even young believers still caught in that fragility mindset, they'll naturally see this Christian call to self-denial and endurance as, well, both foolish and weak.
Foolish and weak.
Yeah. And Greg points out that's exactly how the Apostle Paul's message was received back then by sophisticated Greeks and traditional Jews. It looks like giving up, not like strength.
So if this fragility is widespread, how does Elkan see it playing out? What are the specific manifestations in culture he points to? He gets into this in his second section.
He lists four main things. First, he sees a culture of protests against, quote, any and everything they don't like. Disagreement quickly escalates to public action.
No.
Second, this tendency to feel victimized or targeted in almost every situation, seeing conflict as an attack rather than, just normal human friction.
And he connects that to things like social media dynamics.
He does, which leads to the third point.
Yeah.
The rise of punitive censure, or cancel culture, as it's commonly known.
Wait.
And finally, just being easily triggered or deeply offended by relatively minor things, words, actions, even as he puts it, what people wear on T-shirts.
So looking at all that behavior, Elkan then presents a kind of stark choice for young believers.
Yeah, that's the big takeaway from his second part. He states it very bluntly. Young believers of this generation have the choice to be fragile or to be Christian. But not both.
Not both. That's quite the statement.
It is. He argues the core principles of fragility, prioritizing your feelings over maybe objective truth, not enduring any offense, demanding immediate punishment for perceived wrongs, they just run directly counter to the foundation of Christian life. And that foundation, for Elkan, is love.
Okay, love. Let's unpack that because he uses 1 Corinthians 13, the famous love chapter, in a really specific way.
Oh, absolutely. It's kind of his analytical centerpiece. He basically takes this chapter, often reads sentimentally at weddings, and uses it as a direct rebuttal to this whole fragility philosophy.
He weaponizes the love chapter, almost.
Yeah, you could say that, yeah. He pulls it out of the gentle context and slams it down right into cultural critique. He looks at what love requires versus what the fragile ego demands.
Okay, give us an example. When the passage says, love is not rude, how does Greg apply that today?
Very pointedly. He says it means you have to treat people respectfully, even when you totally disagree, even when they frustrate or offend you.
Even people you might label negatively.
Yes. He gives a specific example, saying you can't just tell someone, even, quote, an old white man who represents the patriarchy, to shut up just because you want to dominate the conversation or feel slighted. Civility is required by love, he argues.
Interesting. And what about love is not selfish? He connects that to work ethic.
He does. He interprets it is not selfish as meaning you can't just aim for the bare minimum effort while maximizing your personal comfort or gain.
Like at work.
Yeah, he ties it to work, saying you can't just phone it in and spend most of your day on social media or personal stuff. Love, in this context, demands real effort and dedication beyond just serving yourself.
Okay, and then the big one, the confrontation with the trigger idea.
This is crucial for him. When 1 Corinthians 13 says love cannot be made angry easily, Elkan sees that as the polar opposite of the modern sensitivity to every potential trigger. Mature love, he argues, has patience. It has a long fuse. It refuses to be constantly hijacked by small offenses.
And the contrast he draws with cancel culture seems pretty direct, too.
Extremely direct. That's where the line, love does not remember wrongs done against it, comes in.
Forgiveness, basically.
Right. A willingness to forgive, to move on. He contrasts that directly with what he sees as the core of cancel culture. Constantly cataloging past wrongs, bringing them up again and again to justify ongoing punishment or exclusion. Loving, in his view, means breaking that cycle of keeping records.
What about when things get chaotic? He mentions the line, love is never happy when others do wrong.
He applies that to social unrest. He argues believers can't celebrate destruction like looting or burning businesses, even if it's done in the name of protest or some perceived higher good.
And the flip side, it is always happy with the truth.
Means you have to pursue truth, champion truth, even when it's uncomfortable, bitter, or, yes, even triggering. Truth over feelings, essentially.
So pulling it all together, Elkan positions this resilient love as the answer to cultural negativity.
Yes, he really emphasizes love's endurance. Love never gives up on people. It never stops trusting, never loses hope, and never quits. He contrasts this relentless optimism with what he sees as a widespread negative, defeatist outlook among many young people about society, about humanity's future.
The world says give up, love says endure.
That's the gist. The world says it's too broken, quit. Love, biblically defined, says endure and maintain hope.
And he concludes that section with the ultimate declaration for the chapter, love never fails.
Right. Choosing love for Elkan is choosing God's stronger, wiser way over the world's weak, fragile way of handling life's pressures.
Now, before we talk about where else he applies this, Elkan does add an important clarification, doesn't he? But who experiences fragility?
Yes, that's in section 3. He makes it clear this isn't just a Gen Z issue. It exists in older people, too. He even suggests a simpler term for it is just pettiness or immaturity.
Pettiness or immaturity. So believers aren't immune just because they're Christian or older?
Exactly. He says age is no guarantee against it.
Okay. That makes sense then why he applies this critique inside the church itself. What does fragility look like there, according to Greg?
He gives examples like someone threatening to leave the church just because they didn't get their way on a committee, or completely rejecting, say, a reasonable disciplinary action.
Things that seem minor in the grand scheme.
Right, and he draws this really important distinction between splitting a church over core doctrine, which might be necessary, versus splitting over what amounts to immaturity or fragility.
He mentions historical examples.
Yeah, like denominations apparently starting because of disagreements over like what the chairs should be made of or minor wording changes in the service. Not theology, but pettiness.
So the goal for Christians should be
to learn to keep the big fights for big problems, as Elkan puts it, to actually work through conflicts, resolve them, rather than just running away whenever things get uncomfortable or someone's feelings get hurt.
And he takes this same logic into marriage. He argues marriage cannot accommodate fragility either.
Absolutely. His thesis is pretty stark. He connects the rise in divorce rates directly to this cultural increase in fragility.
Why? What's the connection?
He argues couples go in expecting this picture-perfect thing instantly, without being willing to do the hard, often messy work that real intimacy requires over time.
Marriage is work, not just romance.
Exactly. He calls marriage a lifelong love exercise in conflict resolution. Mature people handle conflicts. Immature, fragile people treat every disagreement like it's nuclear war requiring escape.
So it comes back to that core foundation again.
Precisely. Elkan concludes that relationships built on that resilient 1 Corinthians 13 kind of love can endure storms. But those based on fragile sentiments, ones that prioritize immediate comfort over commitment, they just crumble under pressure.
So wrapping this up, Greg Elkan really presents a clear dichotomy for believers today.
Very clear. He says the world offers fragility, which he basically defines as immaturity, avoiding conflict, always prioritizing your own rights and feelings.
But the Christian path demands something different.
Yes. Resilient love, self-denial, a willingness to endure, to work through things.
I think the core takeaway here is Elkan's belief that this long, safe space experiment unintentionally created a generation that's, in his view, poorly equipped for normal life challenges.
Challenges like criticism, confrontation, dealing with being offended. He thinks they're almost set up to fail when things get tough relationally or culturally.
Yeah, that framework definitely makes you question things like where's the line between healthy boundaries and just giving up too easily.
It's a tough balance.
It really is. And if Elkan is right, even partially, that immaturity and pettiness are driving forces behind so many breakups, whether it's churches, organizations, or marriages, then what is that practical boundary between necessary self-care and the kind of lifelong love exercise of sticking through conflict? That's definitely something for you to think about this week.
This was an audio recording of Elkan's Word for Today, the devotional for growing believers by Greg Elkan. For more information on other edifying resources or to support this growing work, visit us at www.gregelkan.com. That's GREGELKAN.com. You can send your comments or questions by WhatsApp or Telegram to +234 813 664 2912. God bless you.